Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's episode, I will present another case from the United Kingdom. These are events from 2017 that took place in the English city of Leeds. I invite you to listen to the story of Sinead Wooding. Sinead Wooding was born in 1990 in Leeds. Her mother had health problems, so when the girl was just 4 years old, she went to live with her father and his older daughter, Natalie. When you looked at little Sinead, she seemed like an exceptionally sweet child, but in reality she was a typical tomboy who constantly got her stepsister into trouble. This often led to arguments between the sisters, but they were the typical sibling quarrels that were never held onto for long. As the girls grew up and Natalie moved out of the family home, Sinead, in her teenage years, decided to live with her. However, the relationship between the sisters did not work out as well as they initially thought. Sinead did not want to help her sister with household chores. She felt that Natalie burdened her with too many tasks and constantly refused to do them. She did not like being told what to do and wanted to be independent and make her own decisions. As the tension between the sisters grew, Sinead, at the age of 17, decided it was time to start living on her own and moved out from her older sister. She then decided that London would be the ideal place to start anew, and she did just that. In the capital, she met a man with whom she got involved, and soon their first child was born, followed shortly by their second. However, the relationship with the father of her children was not very successful, and the couple broke up. Sinead then decided to return to Leeds, where her entire family lived. There, she tried to put her life in order. She took on various jobs, working as a hairdresser, but also did not shy away from jobs considered to be for men, such as a bricklayer or a car mechanic. Despite her willingness to work hard, she increasingly turned to alcohol. Alcohol became a frequent part of her life, to the point where it started to bother her. She still had her 2 small children to care for and had to consider that her behavior could lead to her children being taken away from her, something she desperately wanted to avoid. Then she came up with an idea to help herself fight this problem. She decided to convert to Islam, believing it would help her discipline herself and stop drinking. She wanted to do it for herself, but above all for her children. Her sister was a bit surprised by Sinead's decision. She knew Sinead had a drinking problem, but changing religion to fight alcoholism seemed at least strange to her. However, it seemed that Sinead had made up her mind and was not going to change it. After converting to Islam, Sinead changed her style of dress, starting to dress like Muslim women and living a completely different lifestyle than before. She began to meet more frequently with people who, like her, were followers of Islam. In 2014, she met a man who worked at a market in Leeds as a fast food vendor. This man was Ashar Ali, a year older than her. The couple started dating, and very quickly, just 6 months later in February 2015, they got married. Sinead, who changed her name to Zachariah, was delighted with her husband. He was a very devoted father to her children and the husband she had always dreamed of. She felt that finally everything was going the way she wanted. She had control over her life and managed to eliminate alcohol from it. However, what initially seemed like a dream come true soon turned out to be the opposite. After the marriage, it quickly turned out that Sinead was pregnant. Shortly after their first child was born, the couple discovered they would soon be parents again. From the outside, they seemed like a happy family, but in reality, Sinead and Ashar constantly argued. The arguments were so intense that even their neighbors could clearly hear their raised voices. These situations led Sinead to turn to drinking again. She quickly reverted to her old style of dressing, no longer caring about following the rules of Islam. This increased the tension between the spouses even more. Ashar wanted to control his wife's behavior, but he realized that alcohol had completely changed Sinead. Arguments between the spouses erupted more frequently, and it often happened that after a quarrel, Sinead would take her children and move in with her friend for a few days. She always took her children with her because her husband had threatened to take them away to Pakistan. She feared that he would eventually keep his word. She knew that because she had a drinking problem for a long time, which made her more aggressive, it would be easy for Ashar to prove in court that he was the better parent for their children and that custody should be awarded to him. This was the only reason she had not yet decided to end the marriage. She no longer wanted to be Akshar's wife, but the fear of losing her children kept her from getting a divorce. Sinead drank more and more often, and Ashar increasingly raised his hand to her. He also tried to limit her contacts with family and friends, wanting her to be dependent on him so he could control her life. Only Sinead's friends knew about the situation at home. None of her family knew how things really were in her marriage, as Sinead did not tell anyone what was happening behind the closed doors of her home. On May 11, 2017, Sinead, along with Ashar and their children, went to visit their mutual friend Yasmin, who had invited several guests to her home that day. Initially, everyone was having a good time, but when Sinead and her husband started drinking, the atmosphere began to deteriorate. Ashar had previously drunk occasionally, and at this party he kept drinking with his wife. Around 9 p.m., the couple started arguing, and since the others did not feel comfortable with them arguing in front of them, they were asked to move to the kitchen. The couple continued their exchange of words there. The other guests in Yasmin's home were in the living room, where at one point they heard a noise coming from the kitchen. Yasmin went to check what was happening and soon returned, informing her guests that there was nothing to worry about. It was just the drunk Sinead who had hit something in the kitchen. Shortly after, Ashar returned to the living room alone, as Sinead had decided to leave the party after the argument. She was no longer in the mood to stay. Ashar then decided that he would also return home. He took his children and left. He was convinced that his wife would already be there when he arrived, but Sinead was not at home. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, so Ashar wasn't too surprised. But when Sinead didn't return home for the next few days and didn't respond to his calls or texts, he decided to report her missing to the police. No one knew where she could have gone after leaving the party. She wasn't with any family members, and none of her friends knew where she might be. The police had barely begun investigating her disappearance when, on May 14th around 9 a.m., they received a report about a body found in a nearby forest. A group of students who went jogging in the forest noticed something still smoldering on the ground. When they checked it out, they found it was a woman's body. The police, called to the scene, feared that because gasoline had been used, the body was in such a state that it would be difficult to identify the person. However, the thumb on the left hand was intact, allowing for quick identification. It was the missing 26-year-old Sinead Wooding. Pathologists determined that she had been killed in a different location from where her body was found. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: wounds that appeared to have been inflicted by a knife and another object resembling a hammer. The items used to kill her were never found, so the conclusions were based on evidence. But who could have wanted the young mother dead? The police searched the forest where Sinead's body was found and discovered a receipt from a gas station nearby. It might have accidentally fallen from the person who had left the body there. The receipt was dated May 13th, the day before her body was found. The police immediately went to the gas station, hoping there were surveillance cameras. Luckily, the gas station had cameras, and they identified a car whose driver had refueled at the time indicated on the receipt. They quickly identified the owner of the Volkswagen Golf and seized the car for examination. There might still be traces in it proving that Sinead's body was transported in that vehicle. Inside the trunk of the car, they found a small blood stain, which was sent for analysis. The tests confirmed the investigators' suspicions it was Sinead's blood, and her body had been transported in that car. However, when the car's owners were questioned, they had alibis for the times when the car was seen at the gas station and other locations in the city. They weren't the ones driving the Volkswagen. On the evening of May 13th, they had lent their car to a friend, 21-year-old Ashar Ali, Ashar's younger brother. This information led to the arrest of both Ashar and his brother. Sinead's family was shocked by the arrest. They didn't know that her marriage had been troubled for a long time. They believed Ashar was the husband she had always wanted, and suddenly, along with his brother, he was detained as a suspect in Sinead's murder. The investigators began to look closely at Sinead and Ashar's marriage. None of her relatives could say anything negative about it. Sinead had tried to maintain appearances and keep her family out of her marital problems. However, it turned out that on May 10th, the day before the party at Yasmin's, Sinead had called the police. She reported that she was afraid to return home where her husband was because of threatening texts and calls from him, making her uncertain about what he might do. The police took her report, but all they did that day was follow up with a phone call to ensure Sinead and her children were safe at home. She confirmed they were. The next day, officers went to her home, but no one answered the door, and Sinead didn't respond to their calls. Since they couldn't reach the young mother, they returned on May 13th. This time, they only found her husband, who told them he hadn't seen her since she left the party at a friend's house on May 11th and had no idea where she was. Akshar explained to the police that such behavior wasn't unusual for his wife. She had disappeared for short periods before and always returned. However, the police's interest in his wife prompted him to report her missing on May 14th, explaining that despite many attempts, he couldn't reach her. It hadn't occurred to him to do so earlier. Akshar became the prime suspect in the case. The police needed to determine where and when the murder had taken place. The last place Sinead was seen was at her friend Yasmin's house. The police questioned everyone who had been at Yasmin's house that day, but no one except Akshar knew how Sinead left the house. No one witnessed her leaving. No one besides Yasmin saw what happened in the kitchen. Everyone heard a rather loud noise coming from there, but only Yasmin went to check what was happening. It seemed that Akshar and Yasmin were the last people to see Sinead alive. The police decided they needed to search Yasmin's house, as it was possible that Sinead had been killed there. However, despite their suspicions, they found nothing at the scene that would lead them to believe Sinead had been killed in Yasmin's kitchen. There were no traces of blood. It was only during a more thorough search of Yasmin's house that they discovered a hidden basement entrance in the kitchen floor. It wasn't visible at first glance. When the police saw it, they immediately thought about what Yasmin's guests had heard. Perhaps Sinead didn't hit anything in the kitchen but was thrown into the basement, which could explain the loud noise they heard. The police climbed down the ladder into the basement and saw a dark stain in the middle of the floor, which someone had apparently tried to clean. It was also evident that the lower part of the walls, which were painted black, and the upper part, which was cream-colored, had been cleaned in one area. This was most noticeable on the lighter part of the wall. Whoever cleaned it did not do a thorough job because traces of blood were still visible on the wall. Samples taken from these traces confirmed that it was Sinead's blood. Investigators suspected that during an argument between the couple, Sinead was pushed into the basement. Later, after all the guests had left, she was killed there. Her body was left in the basement for the next 2 days, and only moved when the police started inquiring about her following her earlier report. It was then transported to the forest. This meant Yasmin Ahmed must have either known about the entire event or even participated in the murder. Therefore, Yasmin was immediately arrested, along with her housemate, Vicky Briggs. Yasmin did not admit to participating in the killing of her friend. Initially, investigators were unsure of her motive. However, during the investigation, it came to light that as Akshar and Sinead's marriage deteriorated, Akshar increasingly sought comfort in Yasmin's arms. He often visited her house, sometimes stopping there on his way home from work before returning to his own home. This enraged Sinead and led to further arguments in their marriage. But neither Yasmin nor Akshar admitted to having an affair. They also did not confess to killing Sinead. They tried to blame each other while proving their own innocence. The trial began in November 2017. Akshar continued to maintain his version of events from that evening. He saw Sinead leaving Yasmin's house, and if there was evidence that his wife was killed in the basement, it must mean she returned there later and Yasmin killed her. Yasmin insisted she had nothing to do with Sinead's death. She admitted only to cleaning the basement to cover up any evidence of the crime, as it was her house and she did not want to be accused of participating in the murder. In court, Yasmin testified that Sinead often complained about Akshar being abusive, even when she was pregnant. Yasmin had seen bruises on Sinead's body several times and had taken her children to school when Sinead was too embarrassed to be seen in public. Yasmin had advised her friend to leave Akshar, as there was no point in staying in such a toxic relationship. The jury also heard that Sinead intended to leave Akshar and that the argument that broke out at Yasmin's house was about what would happen to the children after their separation. However, the jury did not believe Yasmin and Akshar's claims of innocence. They were seen near Yasmin's house on the streets after Sinead's disappearance, captured on CCTV. They met shortly before Akshar's brother borrowed the car from their friends. During the trial, a student who lived next door to Yasmin's house testified. She was awakened at 1 a.m. on May 14th by the sound of a car door slamming. When she looked out the window, she saw someone trying to park a Volkswagen Golf behind Yasmin's house. After a while, 2 people, a man and a woman, came out of the house carrying something that looked like a human body wrapped in a sheet or carpet. It was difficult to tell in the dark, but it was clear that what they were carrying was not light, as they struggled to get it to the car. Once they managed, they placed the bundle in the trunk. Both Ashar Ali and Yasmin Ahmed were sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 22 years before eligibility for parole. Yasmin's housemate, Vicky Briggs, was sentenced to 4 years for attempting to cover up the murder. She had helped clean the basement and burn evidence in a fire. Akshar's brother and his mother, who were initially suspected of helping in the murder, were found not guilty. Thank you for listening until the end. Goodbye, take care.